transformation for collective good. Awesome. So we have the meeting being recorded. Awesome. So here in your screen, you can see all the opportunities that we have for us to be together along the week. I'm not going to go into the all the details. You can see everything that we do at bshcenter.org. But I would like to highlight a couple of things. So first is we do have our daily prayers from Monday to Sunday, every day, 6 p.m. We all get together in the same link and we pray for each other. We pray for the planet. Everybody's welcome to join. We know that it's in giving that we receive, so please come join us. I would like also to highlight that we have an internal service every Monday, and this is when we do healing by distance. So if you or anyone who you love is in need of healing, please send us a direct message and send us the name, what is that the person is in need. We are all going to be vibrating for the person to receive the healing that is needed. Now, we do recommend that the person stay in tune, read the gospel, meditate during this period, so then we can work together and the person can be open to receive the blessings. We do have a new study book on Wednesday, which is Heaven and Hell, a book by Allan Kardec, and it just started at the end of May, so everybody's welcome to join. Even if you lost a couple of the beginning, everybody's welcome to join. And we have a study that also started beginning of May, No Solar, every Sunday, 6:30 p.m., everything Pacific time. We do have the two other books that we are reading on Tuesday and Thursday, the Initiation into Spiritism by the book, with the book by Teresinha de Oliveira, with the Divine Light group, and the Living Spring by Emmanuel through Chico Xavier every Thursday here at PSH. Yeah, and we have fraternal assistance every Wednesday from 4 to 7. This is just a moment for you if you're willing to share what is happening to you, if you need to vent, if you need someone just to be with you. We are here for you and with you, so please count on us to be with you. Yeah, so as I said, our first part, we always have someone enlightening us with understanding of all the studies that we do. And today we have a very special guest, which is Peter Hayes, and I'm going to introduce him for those who do not know him. So Peter Hayes is a worker at Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey, where he has been an active member for over 25 years. He is a regular participant at the Tri-State Spiritist Federation, and in 2021, he joined the board of directors in the United States Spiritist Federation as Director of Outreach. He has done lectures in English about Spiritism within the United States and has participated in several U.S. Spiritist symposiums. Peter loves to play guitar and has taught at Spiritist group Love and Light. He has a long background in theater as a playwright, literary manager, electrician, and carpenter. Peter has published several children's books with his wife, Brazilian author Betty Hosen. I never know how to pronounce her name.
Rosen or Rosenspike.
Thank you. Through their companies. Oh, awesome. Through their company, Sem Fronteiras Press, and with publishers in Brazil and Colombia. So today, our beautiful guest is going to talk about strengthening mediumship and the Spiritist movement. So thank you so much for being here, Peter, and please take it away. And everybody, please help me to welcome our dear Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. Greetings from Spiritist Group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey. And let me try to share, and we'll get going here. Okay. I assume everybody can see this okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Great.
It's not in, oh yeah, it's in presentation mode now. Yep.
Yeah, no, I just did it. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to be talking about some of the aspects of mediumistic meetings to some extent, but on some level, this presentation is not merely about mediumistic meetings. Even so, mediumistic meetings, if a center is engaging in them, quite likely the mediumistic group at a Spiritist center is the nucleus of that group in many ways. It is the place in which there is, of course, an effort to try to work and help spirits. The thing is, sometimes if there are problems at a Spiritist center, they quite likely could originate within the mediumistic group first and then reverberate from there. That may happen for a few reasons. Perhaps it could happen because that particular Spiritist group is actually starting to have a positive impact in the work that they're doing. And so they are therefore subject to attack. It's not uncommon for Spiritist centers to be under attack at times in various ways. However, I should stress that doesn't mean one should become fearful all the time or even paranoid about such things. Rather, I think the message overall is that we always have to pay attention and we have to be careful and be vigilant. How do we be vigilant? Well, there are lots of ways. But one thing we could focus on to get started is what the Medium's book says about the purpose of a mediumistic meeting. But before I do that, I want to focus on three general areas in this presentation. Understanding division tactics and how that may be happening, how to foster unity and what drives efforts to foster unity. And then finally, I want to spend a little time with the kind of paradoxical comment that Jesus is a perfect leader and yet surrounded by problematic followers. When we think about a mediumistic meeting at a Spiritist center, again, assuming for a moment it's one of the most important activities at a Spiritist center, obviously not the only one. There's study groups, there's lectures, there's fraternal assistance, there may be some kind of charity work going on in the local community. But even so, the mediumistic meeting is the place in which there is a little more direct work with the mentors of the center. The Medium's book reminds us that a meeting is a collective being whose qualities and properties are the sum of its members, forming a sort of cluster. And this cluster will be stronger the more homogeneous it is. So right away, this sentence is telling us that it depends on the chemistry of the participants in that group. When a mediumistic group is formed, very likely it's going to be made up of people with different personalities, different backgrounds, different levels of knowledge. But the question is, can they come together? What is the temperament of that group? And when this sentence at the end mentions homogeneous, that does not mean that everybody has to think the same way. But what it does mean is people have to respect one another. It is essential that regardless of the people involved in a mediumistic group, it's very delicate work. And therefore, it's very important that the participants in a mediumistic group are able to communicate with each other, able to, well, find ways to be in harmony with each other. And that may take a while, depending upon who the people are. And when we focus on division tactics, this can happen in a number of ways. Really, division tactics have to do with the different ways in which spiritual obsession might occur. Obsession, just to make a basic point, has two general parts to it. A spirit that wants to obsess, a spirit that is probably very angry, very upset, unbalanced, struggling with forgiveness. And that spirit is wanting to direct its efforts towards an incarnate individual. So like mediumship, it requires two things: a spirit that wants to obsess a particular individual, and then an individual who happens to be the object of that obsession and actually, perhaps unconsciously or consciously, but most likely unconsciously, is participating in this and unfortunately probably not fully aware of it. Spirits that obsess generally want to disrupt harmony. Sometimes there are spirits in the realm of darkness, as they say, who simply just hate. These are spirits who have felt betrayed in the past. They could have been victims of something unfair, and they want revenge. Sometimes they're very smart and very logical, and their attitude is simply along the lines of, look, people create their own openings. People like mayhem. People thrive on adversity. People like to be angry. People like conflict. So we're going to help facilitate that. It's as if what they're saying is, we see your flaws and you deserve what you get. This attitude is the antithesis of what Jesus stresses about compassion. And again, the ability to forgive. Forgiveness is the cornerstone of Christianity, after all. It's as if these obsessors are seeing something in themselves that they don't know how to deal with. So their reaction is to hate it. I'm going to talk about this more than once, I suspect, but it's like Jesus's ministry of love. Lots of positive guidance and lots of inspiration in Jesus's teachings. And many people are inspired by it, obviously, but then there are some people who actually have the opposite reaction. They hate Jesus for being so exemplary an example for us. So there are spirits that simply want to disrupt harmony. And what happens is we become the objects of obsession because of the way in which we make ourselves available. All of us have flaws, of course. Some of us struggle with anger. Some of us are prideful. Some of us are addicted to sensuality in some way. Some of us are argumentative with others. Some of us like to provoke others and don't even realize perhaps that we're doing it. The list goes on and on and on. But the more we don't have awareness of what our flaws are, the more we can become a participant in an effort to somehow exploit our very own weaknesses. So part of the division tactic is for a spirit that's observing us to see what our weaknesses are and then play upon them. Sometimes if we are having a problem with somebody, we may be quick to judge that person. Maybe our judgment's not terribly fair or it's a distortion, but away we go. We just indulge in it. And there may be a spirit that's pushing us to do so. I do want to mention very quickly, though, and to keep this in mind, is that it's very tempting to blame everything on obsessor spirits, but that is a little too convenient and kind of a cop-out. I think it's safe to say that even if there are efforts to somehow attack us, we have to take responsibility for what we do or what we don't do. In the book, Jesus in Our Days, chapter 19, Joanna de Angelis opens with an interesting point, rather compelling point, about the nature of humanity, which is we are capable of being fraternal, we're capable of being compassionate, we're capable of being loving, giving, understanding, patient, all these positive qualities that Jesus encourages us to do. And yet, it's not a given. Why? Well, what is our heritage? We're animals. Millennia ago, a couple of million years ago, say the Neanderthal period, the earlier period of when of hominids, when we split off from chimpanzees, the cave people period. Sometimes if someone back then was angry, their first impulse was just to kill somebody, period. But evolution has tempered these kinds of impulses with us. We've had societies for roughly 10, almost 15,000 years now, more organized societies. And we have learned over a long period of time, and some of this is influenced also by natural selection and gene selection. We have learned how more positive behavior actually ensures our survival. That's not always 100% of the time, but from an evolutionary perspective, that's generally true. And we have learned to temper our more animal-like impulses. And of course, the whole goal, or a major important goal of Spiritism or any spiritual pursuit, is that we're trying to improve. We're trying to, shall I say, be a little more in harmony with our animal-like nature. I would not say eradicate it, because our animal-like nature has some advantages to it. I mean, it gives us drive. It gives us sometimes a push for life, which can be positive. But obviously, if we're giving in to any kind of impulse we might have, I'm angry, I want to hit somebody kind of impulse, that clearly is not okay. And Joanna de Angelis stresses in chapter 19 of this book that we have to fight against this impulse, this more animal-like impulse. She doesn't necessarily use the animal-like impulse, but I think she's alluding to that in a way. In other words, her point is we have an amazing capacity to be more in harmony with Jesus, to follow Jesus's teachings, to do our best to put them into daily practice in our lives as much as we can. But it's also not a given. And needless to say, and Spiritism stresses this a lot, we may have to spend a lot of time going in all kinds of directions and making all kinds of mistakes before this kind of impulse, an impulse to be more fraternal rather than judgmental or hateful, but this impulse to be more fraternal, where it begins to feel more natural for us. There's a book from Herminio C. Miranda called Dialogue with the Shadows. Hasn't been published in English yet, but going back to mediumistic meetings, if we think about our impulses in general, our behavior, the ways in which we can be vulnerable to spiritual obsession, which again is a division tactic. And I want to emphasize again that sometimes if there's a division tactics that may be happening with members of a Spiritist center who are part of a mediumistic meeting, if it's not being paid attention to enough, that kind of behavior or vulnerabilities can begin to reverberate throughout a Spiritist center. This is why people have to pay attention. But just focusing on mediumistic meetings for a moment, Herminio C. Miranda points out that, and this is, I think, happened to many of us who have at least started mediumistic meetings, is the obstacles that might occur. A big one is sometimes just getting to the center on the day of a mediumistic meeting. Sometimes almost without fail. The day people try to go to a mediumistic meeting is the day that the traffic is worse, so they didn't leave early enough. It's the day when there's an issue that suddenly happens with a family member, or maybe a friend drops by out of nowhere and interrupts us and delays us. Or it could be something more internal, like, I'm really tired today. I don't really want to do this. I don't have the energy. Or it's raining. I don't really want to go out there. Or it's really hot. I don't really want to go out there, and so forth. And his point is sometimes these impulses kind of come out of nowhere, and they may influence us and affect our attendance. And then almost by magic, it just evaporates. It's like a few hours go by and suddenly we don't have that impulse anymore. So what he's pointing out is that we have to be mindful of this, because what's happening there is there may be an effort to persuade us in a subtle way, but an effort to persuade us not to actually get in the car and go. The other thing that can happen is disagreements within meetings. again, I mentioned before in that quote from the Medium's book, it's not that everybody in a mediumistic group is going to see everything the same way all the time, but respect for one another, despite differences of opinion, is essential. And if there are disagreements, they really need to be addressed as soon as possible. What gets us into trouble in mediumistic meetings is when there are these kind of beneath the surface tensions that are slowly festering, and people have certain feelings towards other members of the group. Maybe they're judging one another from time to time and stuff like that. And they're not actually confronting it. And when I say confront, I mean to do so in a respectful way, in ways that are suggested in the Gospel according to Spiritism. It is important that if there are disagreements, that there be enough communication, the right kind of communication, the kind of respectful communication, to make sure that these potentially minor tensions don't flare up and get worse. And Herminio C. Miranda also makes another important point. He makes many important points, but one of them is this. A mediumistic group is not just working on the day of the mediumistic meeting at a Spiritist center. We're doing work one way or another, indirectly perhaps, for the rest of the week. We cannot just be on our best behavior on the day that we go to a mediumistic meeting at our Spiritist center. What about how we are outside of the Spiritist center? This is really connected, of course, to do we actually put the codification, everything we try to learn from Spiritism, into practice in our daily lives? It is not easy. I think frequently we're reminded of our faults, and that's okay. But we have to be vigilant enough to be internally consistent. So if we behave one way at a Spiritist center, and let's say we're counseling a spirit or we're a medium giving passivity to a spirit, and we are trying to be charitable and fraternal and doing all the things we should be doing in a mediumistic meeting, but then we leave and we go home and another day goes by and we maybe have moments where we're very judgmental or very angry and so forth, this might become an issue because, as Herminio Miranda points out, sometimes, especially with mediums, a spirit that gave passivity to through a particular medium may follow that medium and check them out. Could be the same thing with the counselor or the person who's in charge of the mediumistic group. What is this person like outside of these mediumistic meetings? And if there is an inconsistency, then it's possible that we who are in the mediumistic meetings will be confronted about that. The spirit may do an aha moment, gotcha kind of thing. If that happens, of course, we have to have the honesty and the humility and be prepared to respond to that and not be caught off guard. But the point is, when we talk about vigilance, when we talk about doing the work on one day a week at a mediumistic meeting, we also are doing the work outside of the mediumistic meeting too. But I should stress, this does not mean that we have to be saints all the time, that we can never make mistakes. We must always have our thoughts elevated. We're going to mess up. I think that's a given. But are we noticing it when it does happen? And do we have the emotional and intellectual honesty to confront it, acknowledge it somehow? Now, I mentioned before that our personal flaws make us vulnerable. When we think about division tactics, spirits that want to create disharmony see certain flaws that we have, and then they try to exploit them. And I'm going to spend some time focusing on a story or a moment from this book, Spiritual Disturbances, by Manuel Filomeno de Miranda. And it's the story of a guy named Eduardo. Eduardo is a Brazilian. He is married to a woman named Etelvina. Eduardo is in his 40s. He and his wife, Etelvina, have been married probably a good 25 years or so. They have 3 adult children. Their oldest daughter has her own children, so they're actually grandparents. And again, Eduardo's probably early to mid 40s, somewhere in there. He married kind of young. He's also the president of a Spiritist center. They use the term Spiritist Society, but it's a Spiritist center and a decent sized one too, a fairly large one. However, Eduardo has a personality flaw. He is addicted to sensuality. His sexuality is out of balance. And he has cheated on his wife in the past. When he's introduced in this book, he has already met a young woman named Erasima. Erasima is about 21, beautiful woman, goes to the Spiritist Center, very interested in Spiritism, impressed by him, by Eduardo. And he sees how beautiful she is and that she seems to look up to him, and he just can't help himself. He seduces her. She knows he's married. She knows very clearly that he's married, but she gives in. And the two of them have an affair. When both of them are introduced in the book, it happens because this particular Spiritist center has a group of spirit mentors who are trying to help. And they're led by none other than Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, the great Spiritist from Brazil who lived in the 19th century. The problem is this. Erasmus is pregnant. So when he and she are introduced, and Dr. Bezerra and his team of mentors go to them, they arrange for a meeting. And what they do is through astral projection, both Eduardo and Erasmus are brought into the same space with Dr. Bezerra and the others. While the others are giving passes to them, Dr. Bezerra talks to Eduardo and basically says, she's pregnant. What are you going to do about this? Eduardo's first impulse is she has to have an abortion. And Dr. Bezerra says that's out of the question. You know, it's obvious in this moment that Eduardo, the president of a Spiritist center, has really lost himself and lost his moral compass, so to speak. And Dr. Bezerra stresses to him in a dialogue, and again, this is done as Eduardo and Erasmus are through astral projection are having a meeting with these spirits. So they're just sleeping. Dr. Bezerra tells Eduardo that if you insist on doing that, on terminating a young life, just to cover up your recklessness, this will come to haunt you, so to speak. There will be consequences down the road. Even if you are numb to the implications of this, the fact is, those who hide from the truth, no matter how skilled they are at obfuscating the truth, eventually the truth will surface. It is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And he goes on to say to Eduardo that if you don't do something about this now, and this gets worse as time goes on, you're going to have problems later on, in which eventually this numbed reaction you have is going to dissipate, and you're going to feel very guilty about this and have a lot of regrets. And you may in the future come back with either physical problems of some kind or emotional imbalance of some kind. So, of course, Dr. Bezerra's message to Eduardo is you have to do something about this now. If you delay, it's just going to be worse. He kind of registers it. Again, it's an astral projection. Then Eduardo and Erasmus both wake up. We focus on him. He's a little agitated, thinking about this whole thing. He doesn't quite absolutely know for sure that she's pregnant, by the way, not yet. But later that day, after he's woken up, he goes to the Spiritist Center. He delivers a lecture. It's not a very heartfelt lecture. After all, there's something, he's unbalanced at this point. So he kind of goes through the motions. Erasmus shows up at the center, and the two of them meet privately in a small room at the Spiritist Center where they actually began their affair, because it was at the Spiritist Center that the two of them had their extramarital affair. And she confirms, I'm pregnant. It's as if the meeting with Dr. Becerra hadn't happened, because his response is, you have to get an abortion. And she looks at him like, wait a minute, we both know that's wrong. How could you say that? And his attitude is like, well, how far along are you? Maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is. Fetus is like this. It's okay. Then something interesting happens. He's clearly under the influence of a spirit. And she is also under the influence of a spirit. But her reaction in that moment is to kind of blow up at him. And her voice changes as if something has taken over. And she just lays into him and tells him he's a coward. And then she tells him, if I go through with an abortion, I'm going to commit suicide. And their exchange gets very loud. And others at the Spiritist Center hear something coming out of this room, and they knock, but the room is locked. So they, and then suddenly, Eduardo and Restum are very quiet. And then the people who are outside the room stop hearing noises, and they can't get in anyway, so they give up and they leave. Well, after this exchange, Dr. Bezerra Menezes and his team of spiritual mentors realize they have to take the next step. There is a mediumistic meeting at this particular center, and they're involved in it. There are 2 competent meetings at this particular group, and Dr. Bezerra and his team arrive. And again, through astral projection, Eduardo and Erasima are brought in to the meeting. And what happens is that there's a dialogue with the spirit mentor, with the spirit obsessor of Eduardo. And this time, what we find out is that the obsessor is very angry, very upset, was a victim of the Inquisition. And so part of what this spirit obsessor hates is that this guy, Eduardo, is a spiritist. He follows Jesus. He's trying to be, a saint and all that. And yet look what he does. And they take absolute delight in that. These are obsessors who were victims of the Inquisition. There's kind of an interesting comment in which some of the mentors of this group kind of acknowledge that they were maybe part of this Inquisition centuries ago. Of course, they realize the mistakes they made. They're not the same in this moment as they were at that time. But what they're doing in this mediumistic meeting, it's basically a disobsession meeting, is they're disconnecting the spirit that's connected to Eduardo. There are actually 2 of them, 2 obsessors. Eduardo, the more he listens to this spirit talk, again, it's astral projection. He kind of begins to go, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And then, meanwhile, there's some interesting comments and implications about all this. This book is being narrated by Manuel Filomeno de Miranda. He's a little bit like Andre Luiz. He's an observer of everything that's going on, and he's describing it to us. And there's comments here about, okay, on the one hand, Eduardo's behavior is like, oh my God, he's the president of a Spiritist center and he's did this. And yet there's also a very fraternal approach being taken by the mentors, who clearly see that he's made huge mistakes, but they're also trying to help him. And one of the members of the group says to Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, makes a very interesting comment about what a Spiritist center is for. And I'd like to share this with you all. He says the Spiritist Center is a sanctuary of blessings where the afflicted receive the bread of peace and courage through the prayers they direct to the heavens. As we know, all efforts are marked by love, which is the seal of Jesus Christ in Spiritism, producing successive waves of light that ascend toward the infinite to find synchronization with the blessed spheres that watch over the spiritual endeavors carried out on the earth. In other words, Eduardo is in a bad situation, but he's not alone. There is help available. The mentors of this center are doing what they can to try to help. And it's, I think, very comforting when we think about what a Spiritist Center provides, that if it's got mentors who, and the center has loving, compassionate mentors, then we are receiving help. You know, the Spiritist Center is a sanctuary, and it can be a blessing. Because when people come to a Spiritist Center, frequently it's because they're in trouble, especially if they're, not regular participants. There's like three general levels, I guess, of participants. There are those who show up because they're fascinated by the phenomena and it's kind of a gee whiz thing, and then they may or may not come back. And then there are those who start to learn a little bit about what the Spiritist codification is about, and they may go, wow, this is great, this is amazing, and they participate for a while, and then they may disappear, or they may stay on, it depends. And then there are the regular participants who've actually made a commitment to learning the codification and hopefully putting it into practice in their daily lives. But the more we seek help, and despite all of his flaws, Eduardo is beginning to be a willing participant in seeking help. That's what makes possible the idea that the love that is embodied in Jesus, that this produces energy, waves of light, if you will, and it's part of an infinite connection with God, and it creates synchronization. And that synchronization, the blessed spheres, also help the mentors who are plugged into this as well. So it's part of a much larger, shall we say, spiritual energetic network. And then this goes on to talk about the quality of the light. And I think it's more of a metaphor, but even so, this beam of light also defends us from the dreadful attacks of the spirits of darkness, who have difficulty crossing the luminous barriers charged with photons, signaling the existence of the good in action for the discarnate workers of the Lord's vineyard. That is, a place where they can find shelters during their visits across the planet. So again, this beam of light reflects energy. We're in some ways talking about the way a spirit vibrates, the level at which a spirit vibrates. The more we connect with Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, the example of Jesus, the more we begin to fortify ourselves. And so I'm going to say something that I'm sure many of you are already aware of, which is that in order to protect ourselves against the obsessor spirits or spirits of darkness, those that might be trying to sabotage us in some way, we have to, of course, do our part and fortify ourselves. And when it mentions photons are, the tiniest particles of light, waves of light, and so forth. And it's as if there is something about the physiology of a lower level spirit that is repelled or there are limits imposed on that spirit as to how much it can do. But that's up to the other spirit. So let me put it this way. If person A is trying to obsess person B, and person A is a spirit, person B is a incarnate, it's up to person B to work with his or her energy enough that the attempts by person A just kind of bounce off of them. So sometimes when people think spirit obsession, they may kind of panic a little bit and think, oh my God, it's open season, we're all under attack. Well, that depends on us. And again, it comes down to consciousness. Are we aware of our own vulnerabilities? I don't know about all of you, But my experience with Spiritism is I'm reminded all the time of what my flaws are. I think that's part of what it does. So there are other implications to this idea. And if we go back to Herminio C. Miranda, his book Dialogue with the Shadows, he at one point strongly advises all of us to read and study chapter 19 from the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is, the title is Faith Can Move Mountains. And it's the famous phrase from Jesus, if you have faith even as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Of course, the mountains being talked about are emotional mountains. The flaws that we have, the emotional hurdles that we have. But the more that we plug into, shall we say, a higher power, something a little bit beyond ourselves, we can begin to receive help. And then it's up to us to work with our own energy to change the kind of environment that we're in. For instance, there's a nice quote in this chapter that says the power of faith receives direct and special application in magnetic action. Through it, humans are able to act on the universal cosmic fluid, modifying its qualities and giving it an almost irresistible impulsion. In the book Spiritual Disturbances, it mentions that it uses the expression psychosphere, which basically the idea is our thoughts make a difference. The kinds of thoughts and intentions we have kind of create the psychosphere around us. And that's what we breathe in. So the question we could ask ourselves, what kind of psychosphere am I creating? Is it a reasonably positive psychosphere, or is it kind of a polluted one? Well, that depends on the kind of thoughts that I'm having and what I'm doing with them. So when it talks about modifying the cosmic principle, it's really suggesting that we have the power within ourselves to work on creating a different environment around us, certainly a different emotional environment around us. And if we go back to the point Joanna de Angelis was making in chapter 19 of Jesus in Our Days, again, we're not a bunch of robots that are somehow subject to external forces and there's nothing we can do about it. This is far from the truth. We can work with ourselves and we can change the environment around us. Now, Eduardo is in a bad situation. Again, the president of a Spiritist center, committing adultery, getting a young woman pregnant. He's in a bad marriage. He and his wife were already talking about divorce before this happened. So they were not in a good place with each other. And yet, when moments like that happen, we could think, oh my God, this center is in trouble. But actually, sometimes moments of adversity like this can be an opening for creating unity. Now, when we think about fostering unity at the Spiritist Center, hopefully there are a lot of other ways that can be done. But I want to focus on this kind of odd example as a way of making a point about how unity can be created. Well, after that mystic meeting I told you, in which Eduardo got more of a glimpse of his spirit obsessor, he wakes up the next day. But what's happened? The first time he had a meeting with Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, he was still kind of attached to the spirit that was obsessing him. The second time he wakes up, there's more of a disengagement. So now Eduardo is beginning to feel a little different. It's like when you are troubled by something, you go to sleep, you wake up the next day, and whatever that was troubling us maybe doesn't feel quite as bad as it did yesterday. Well, that is happening with him. Eduardo wakes up literally, and he also begins to wake up emotionally. And he begins to think about what he's doing and his situation, and he goes, this is crazy. So what does he do? The first thing he does is he goes to the Spiritist Center that he's the president of, and he calls a board meeting and tells them, I've lost the moral authority to be your president. I need to resign, and I am sick. He says he will cooperate in whatever way they wish. And he also tells them that he would like spiritual assistance for himself because he needs it. Of course, some people are shocked. I mean, well, many of them are shocked because, oh my God, our president did this. He doesn't tell them everything he did, but enough that they get the idea. Some of them already kind of knew or did know. And so Eduardo is basically coming clean enough to say, we need to make a change. That's the first thing he does. The second thing he does is he goes to his family. He meets with his wife and his adult children, and he tells them what happened. First, he was unfaithful. He is saying to his wife, I think we should get a divorce, which I think you have wanted. But then the kicker is he tells them, and by the way, I'm going to be a father. Of course, they're all shocked. But then something positive begins to emerge from this. His wife, who's also a spiritist, of course, is surprised, but at the same time, she had been thinking about divorce. And if you may remember in the Gospel according to Spiritism, what does it say about divorce? It doesn't say divorce should never happen. It doesn't say divorce is forbidden. The Gospel according to Spiritism says that if two people are seeking a divorce, it very likely means on some level, emotionally speaking, they were never quite married to begin with, possibly. And, you know, I mean, as a practical matter about marriage, I would say the following. Ideally, a couple would try everything they could think of to try to make a marriage work. But if it doesn't, and they still have irreconcilable differences, then it's better to part company and do so in peace. Because at least if we know that we tried and it still didn't work, then we can be more at peace with that decision rather than just taking the first convenient excuse we can think of as a way to get out of a situation. In the case of Eduardo and Etovina, he has violated her trust enough that the damage has been done. Then something interesting happens, which is that he says to them, can we do a prayer? Can we do the gospel for a few minutes? And they agree, his wife and children, and they do it. And it begins to help. And she, his wife, begins to think, I'm not going to hate this guy for the rest of my life. I could probably keep in touch with him, not as his wife anymore, but they can at least not, separate and never ever see each other ever again, kind of thing. In other words, it's starting to turn into more positive. Why? Because he's being honest. Now, when we connect this to the health of a Spiritist center, nothing will kill a Spiritist center faster, I would like to suggest, than when people in the Spiritist center are collectively dishonest with each other for some reason. I'm not saying Spiritists do this, but, well, two things. If people are afraid to confront the truth in some way, whatever it is, that creates a problem. If people must feel like we must always have a positive vibration, we must always elevate our thoughts, well, yes, we should. But if we have a problem with somebody, we need to do something about it. Remember what Jesus said, that if you have a problem with your brother, reconcile with him before he takes you to court and the judge. And this is a major theme in the Jewish holiday Yom Kippur, which is the most important holiday in Judaism, the Day of Atonement. It's all about reconciling. If we have a problem with somebody, we should take the initiative to try to reconcile. Well, Eduardo takes the initiative to tell the truth to his family. And then the third thing he does is that he goes to Erasima. And again, they had a fight last time, and she's been very upset, very depressed, and she feels like, what am I going to do? I'm going to be alone having this kid, and so forth. So she's very upset. And he goes to her goes to her home, and basically tells her, I resigned from the center. I just told my wife everything that happened in my family, and she and I are going to divorce. And then he says to her, and he changes his mind, obviously, I will be the father of your child and I will raise him if you will have me. Well, she's a little shocked on the one hand, but at the same time is, quite pleased that he has had a reversal of his attitude. This does not mean that everything is going to be just fine between them. But when we think about faith, if they build a foundation of honesty with each other, there's at least a chance. They could have faith that things have a reasonably good chance of working. They're going to have to work at it, of course. I mean, there are a lot of questions one could ask. How well do these two really know each other? Can they form an emotional relationship? Because obviously it was more of a physical relationship before. But is there an emotional relationship? Well, there could be. We don't know in this moment of the book. So, for the purpose of this presentation and the way this story wraps up, basically Eduardo is taking the initiative. And this kind of ties into a general theme about, put simply, harmony from within creates harmony with others. And you could apply that to mediumistic groups as well, of course. Eduardo is more in harmony now. He's got a lot of work to do. It's not going to be easy. He's basically having to kind of start over again in many ways. And now at the age of, a guy in his 40s who's a grandfather is having a new child in his life. So the entire trajectory of his life is going to change. And he's going to have to handle the fallout of a president who basically resigned because he committed a very bad act, put simply. Does that mean people won't forgive him? Well, that remains to be seen. And he has to have the courage to face all that. But when we talk about how we create harmony with ourselves, and then we can create harmony with others. And needless to say, that applies to mediumistic groups too, and it certainly applies within a Spiritist center. The last thing I want to begin to focus on is that when we focus on our spiritual progress in general, Eduardo could be one example. Our road to spiritual progress, however we get there, is often a rocky one. And we may have many, many moments where we get discouraged, but we have to have the courage and the faith and the perseverance to keep on going. And we also have to confront our negativity, I would say, because the irony with Jesus is that in many ways he's a perfect leader, but he has problematic followers. And as a result of that, what are problematic followers? Well, all of us in many ways are problematic followers. What is the relationship that we have with Jesus? Some of us may think his teachings are wonderful, we're very inspired, but at the same time, are we following them? Or are we in some kind of a struggle to follow them? Probably most of us are in some way. Going back to the book, Jesus in Our Days, I mentioned chapter 19 before. The title happens to be Jesus and Ingratitude. Joanna de Angelis describes ingratitude as like a moral infestation. And what she tells us, and she gives the example of the 10 lepers, where Jesus healed 10 lepers, and then one of them comes back to thank him, and he basically says, weren't there 9 others? Now, he doesn't say that because he's vindictive about it, but rather he's pointing out, this is what people do. People don't have a lot of gratitude. How many of those that Jesus helped actually express their gratitude in some way? How many were with him when he was on the cross? Very few. And so Joanna de Angelis is stressing, in a way, I think what she's commenting on is that we all struggle with, certainly we can struggle with ingratitude, But this ties into the idea that in many ways we can be problematic followers. The apostles of Jesus certainly struggled with faith, for instance. Peter immediately comes to mind in a few ways. The quote I gave you before about if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. That's because the apostles were not able to heal the young boy who was suffering from epilepsy, and the apostles were embarrassed. And Jesus says, because he had no faith. And Peter, for instance, is very loyal and has good intentions. But then during the Last Supper, Jesus says to Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times before the crow cocks. And Peter says, oh, I would never do that. And lo and behold, within roughly a 24-hour period, that's exactly what happens. And yet, to his credit, the minute Peter hears the crow cocking as Jesus predicted, he has a big aha moment and he feels deeply ashamed. But that's what gives him the foundation he needs to begin to really find that genuine connection to Jesus. So, are we problematic followers? Yes. Are we going to rebel? Are we going to push back in some way? Probably. But when we reach a point where we maybe have really fouled up in some way, we then have a new foundation to work with. So, perfect leader and problematic followers can sound really discouraging. But when we think about fostering unity, maybe it's actually where we need to start sometimes. Eduardo, as I mentioned before, really made some bad mistakes. Not so sure what his future as a spiritist will be. I imagine he'll continue, but he's not going to be the president anymore. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't created a new foundation from which to work on internally. And this, again, is part of what it means to connect to the light. In the book Spiritual Disturbances, again, focusing on this idea of the light, it basically suggests that when we try to connect to the teachings of Jesus, the example of Jesus, we're connecting to the light of Jesus, and then we can really fortify ourselves, as I mentioned before. And that's why Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. We're not alone. If we do our part, prayer certainly, in the book Dialogue with the Shadows, Herminio C. Miranda does mention, if we suddenly feel maybe some kind of impulse that might be a spirit trying to get to us, stop and pray, try to change our energy, and so forth. It's not that the goal is not to assume that we're never going to have these kinds of problems. The question is, do we notice them? And then do we know what to do as a result? Can we work on our own tendencies, be mindful of our flaws, and then try to work with our own awareness to try to change how we react so that maybe we begin to develop new habits? Will Eduardo, for instance, begin to release himself from his sensuality? I mean, after all, this is a guy who was probably in his 40s. Well, he is in his 40s, probably having some kind of a midlife crisis. I'm not excusing his behavior, by the way. I'm just saying it might be some kind of midlife crisis. Maybe getting involved with a younger woman makes him feel like he's, an attractive guy, and maybe he's trying to reclaim his youth in some way and all that. Well, all of that is part of his flaws and his vulnerabilities, that he has this need to have to act on those kinds of impulses. But can he get to the point where that kind of stuff begins to diminish? And again, we're all in some way like Eduardo. I'm not saying we would commit adultery, but do we not have other flaws and other impulses and ways in which we want to rebel? And if we go back, and I'm starting to wrap up, Joanna de Angelis at the end of chapter 19, much like this idea of the light that's mentioned in the book Spiritual Disturbances, basically encourages to not give up. Even when we feel very discouraged, can we continue? Do we have the strength to get up, even if we've had bad period in our life, moments of uncertainty, Maybe we've made some serious blunders in some way, etc. Can we press on and offer the light? And if we offer the light, then we will not be so troubled by the stubbornness of the darkness. But we have to be honest enough and willing to sometimes look bad if that's the case. And then she says, wherever you turn on a lamp, its light will pour out gifts. It's as if what she's suggesting is there's two types of light. There's the external light, which, can be helpful, but that kind of light casts shadows. Then there's the internal light, which spreads everywhere. There are no shadows cast with that kind of light. And when we have that kind of internal light, we can strengthen our mediumistic meetings. We can strengthen our Spiritist center. If everyone can do that, that's wonderful. And the emphasis is that we take responsibility and combine that with consciousness. And when we do that, we can also strengthen the Spiritist movement as a whole. If we're out and about, so to speak, and we're interacting with others. I was told a while back, somebody asked Ubaldo Franco, how do we spread Spiritism in the United States? And his answer was quite simple. Be the best example you can be. What else can we do? Well, lots of things, but that certainly would be a very important way in which to guide ourselves. So when we work on ourselves, we be the best example we can be, we turn on that lamp from within, then we fortify not only ourselves, but the environment around us. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. Appreciate it.
Wow, Peter, this was so strong. Thank you so much. A lot for us to think. And the books that you mentioned, they are really amazing. I'm going to tag them on the chat in case anyone would like to read them. I just didn't find the dialogue with the shadows in English.
I don't believe it's available. I happen to have a version in English. Unfortunately, I can't distribute it because copyright issues.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we can see if we can study in Portuguese and then someone translate. We can.
Yeah. Yeah. You can. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so we are a little bit over the time, so I'm going to open for one or two questions so then we do not delay too much. But if anyone would like to ask any question to Peter, please feel free to open your mic. Pepe, you have a question?
Yes, actually, I have a comment. I believe I saw in you this. First of all, this is one of the best conferences I ever heard in Spiritism, and it's addressing one of the biggest problems I see in the Spiritist center. I monitor lots of spiritual centers from all over the world, and that's the main cause of problems, and that's the reason they don't grow. Then the book you mentioned reminds me a book by André Louis called Sex and Destiny.
Yeah.
Where similar things happen.
Right.
And when you say the master, the size of the master, faith of the size of the master won't move mountains, you mentioned that maybe it's too exaggerated to move the mountain, but it does have lots of implication in physical. I have people being healed, tumors removed just with the faith. And that's a physical, that's a little mountain. And then you mentioned beams of light mentioned by Joanna De Angelis as something, the fluid. And happens to me, I work with therapists, regression therapists. And one day, one of the spirits, when the person I was helping has a very hard problem in terms of forgiving me. And that person, the grandmother, suggested, let me send her a beam of light and love to her heart. And I said, okay, do it. And I don't know how that happens, but she mentioned that. And today you mentioned that beam of light. And when the person finished, the person was healed. She had forgiven everything. So those things exist and work. So thank you for confirming it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is always wonderful when these things do happen. I mean, maybe you guys have experienced that at your center where you pray for people and then things start to kind of, it's, how do they say it? Spirituality begins to work. It's not a guarantee, of course, but it can happen and it's wonderful when it does.
It's true, Peter, and what a great study today. At BSH, Bezerra's Spiritual Healing Center, we dedicate ourselves more for mediumship and to serving others. And one of the most important exercise that the mentors talking to us mostly all the time, not just one individual mentors, but practically our mentors. They remind us in most every session on Mondays that we have about inner renovation.
Yeah.
Because they said, we do not know where we have come from or whatever we have done in the past or even in now, our mental world, how it's there. And sometimes we have an appearance of a good Samaritan, but in the mental world, in the moral world, is completely different. So they will watching us through our activities in a moral level. So they always remind us more than you inner renovation yourself. Observe yourself. Be aware of everything that you do in every day, in every word, in every thought, how you act when you're driving out there, how you're talking to others, how you are being truthful to yourself and to others. That is the way you will be succeed the service. Right. And I believe all my brothers and sisters are here on the service of Monday, practically that we go for this meeting. We are online, and is no different. The same task is still following us. We don't need to drive to get to the spiritual center, and sometimes it's in our own home. A lot of obstacles appear, even sleeping. You are not going to sleep and suddenly you're overslept. It happened with me many times, not once, not twice. So it is a lot of things that we need to focus, have commitment. And because we are having, like the mentor said, we are have the blessed opportunity to be a servant, but we cannot forget to serve ourselves first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because through the lessons that we bring on the sessions, to the brothers and sisters who are persecuting and being persecuted, that is the lessons we put in our daily life, and we'll see how we are progressing every day a little more. And is it true love? Is it true love? True, like I have read that book in Portuguese from Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, and I love the moral of Eduardo. No, he accepted his defect. He put in there his defect to the family, and he corrected that. So if we have the ability to do it, the mentor, Dr. Paulo said, if you have the ability to do before we say a word, we are great already. We can stop a lot of things. Or if we just start to think and we can stop there, he said, that is the best. So it's a true education, a teaching like today, and continue studying the gospel, studying the books, and participating. The classes is very important for us to participate, because it's through these lessons that we're sharing over here that will help us in our daily life.
Absolutely. I didn't get into this subject, but like in terms of strengthening mediumistic meetings, studying on a regular basis is essential. It's like it's not an option.
Yeah.
You know, when people don't study, causes all kinds of problems. So,
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Peter, thank you so much once more. If anyone has any additional questions or anything that you would like to discuss, please let us know, and we will schedule another moment for us to continue, because this is a very important topic. And the more we discuss, the more we learn, the more we grow, the more we serve. So Thank you so much. So we are going to take 2 minutes break, very quick, and then we're going to come back for the passes and the spiritual healing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure
Peter,
to meet you. So have
God
a good
bless
day.
you. Have a good one. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Outstanding presentation. Terrific.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Peter. Thank you. Gina, feel free to stop recording. Thank you, sister.